About a year and a half ago, I painted this guy. Everybody's favorite, the beautiful man of Astora. It is, of course, Solaire. This is one of the very first models that I printed and painted. When I very first started doing this, you know, he's not terrific. He's okay. Not a lot of detail going on him, but for where I was a year ago, it's not too bad. With 1 year's worth of painting since I last painted this guy, we're going to try and do a new Solaire and make him even bigger and better.
And engage in jolly cooperation. Oh, hello there.
Well, of course, that wasn't done by magic. We, of course, have to paint him. So here we have Solaire split into two parts, as if he's just been hacked in half. But here he is, standing proud and tall, like the beautiful chap that he is. And I'm gonna prop him on this little base that I've got here, and we need to design a couple rocks for him to stand on, because he's not gonna be able to stand on his own on his tiptoes. I've got some foam left over from one of my other dioramas, and I'm just gonna start cutting little cubes, and we're gonna make little bricks for him to stand on. And I'm just gonna use these bricks with a bit of PVA glue, and I'm just gonna start building up some little rubble behind him. Okay, so now that we've got a little base made for him, let's see what it looks like there, with just some rubble at the back for him to kind of stand on. We're gonna put that to one side, and then we can get him glued up. Now we're just gonna leave him to dry, and then we're gonna take him outside and get him primed with some grey cere. Okay, so we have our beautiful boy Solaire, and he's primed with some grey cere. Now I went with that primer because he is a much lighter character than the other ones, so a lighter undercoat would work much better than a darker undercoat, I reckon. So I think we'll start by loading up some contrast onto him. So I've got some of this Blood Angels red, and we're going to use that for the feather. We have our red feather painted in, and I'm going to use the same red, and I'm going to paint in the little sort of rays on the sun. If only we could be so grossly incandescent, am I right? I guess I'm right. Look how beautiful he's looking already. So I'm just going to paint in the face of the sun, and I'm going to do that with some Elden yellow contrast paint, and then we'll have a lovely, lovely incandescent sun. So next bit, we've got his like little leather belt here. So I'm going to do that with some snakebite leather contrast paint. Now I'm going to move on to doing the greens, which is the sort of like shoulder paddy bits that he's got here. And I'm going to attempt some of this Karandras green contrast paint, see how this reacts to the primer. So we have a green sort of shawl thing, but I think for my likings, it's a bit too sort of like lime green vibrant. I think it's a bit too sharp with that bright green, so I think we can dull that down with some acrylics later on, so no worries there. Next thing to do, we've got the little sort of like neckerchief bit, which kind of looks like rope, so we can use some more contrast paint for that. And we can use some of the skeleton horde contrast, which is sort of like a nice ropey kind of color. Obviously use it for bones and skeletons and that, but we can use it to use as kind of rope, especially since we've got a nice bright primer underneath. This stuff should come out relatively beigey and quite nice. Okay, I'm gonna base his little hands, and I'm gonna base them with some Guilliman flesh contrast paint, and then we're nearly there with all the first basings of everything. Okay, hands done. What I'm going to do is I'm going to base his helmet, and I want to try some fancy old NMM on the helmet just to try and, you know, add a bit of interest into this fella. So I'm going to do a base coat of Mechanica Standard Grey and make sure it's nice and thin, and I'm just going to coat the entire helmet with a first base coat. Okay, there's our first base coat of Mechanica Standard Grey on the helmet, and I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to do the same for the shins at the front here, these metal pads. Right, almost there with the first coats on everything. What we need to do next is grab some of our lead belcher metallic paint, all the chainmail that we've got on the arms, the sides and the legs. I'm just going to give them a good old coating of this lead belcher, and I'm going to dry brush it on. Okay, now that we've got that bit done, I just need to get the leather on the back of the legs painted up. So we've got everything with a primary base coat done. Just going to do the same for the white cloth on his outfit. So I'm going to do a quick base of Apothecary white contrast on him, and hopefully we can sort of bring down that bright undercoat of primer a bit, and then after that we can work on our highlights and shadows. So how can we make this better? Well, we're going to start adding in some highlights and some shadows onto him to really bring it to life, because at the moment it looks really kind of flat, boring, and looks kind of just like a cheap toy at the moment. So to make it look a bit more interesting, we're going to move on and do some of this shading and highlighting. So I will start off with the armor, and I'm going to use some Abaddon Black, some Administratum Grey, and some Corax White onto the Mechanicus Standard Grey base that we've already got. And I'll start by mapping out our highlights with the Corax White, and I'll sort of create a sort of staggered bounce with the white, and I'll do it vertically because since it's cylindrical, the light will sort of bounce across it in this fashion. I'm going to grab some of our black. I'm just going to pop in some dark lines in, like so. Looking kind of ridiculous at the moment. But now I'm going to work with the two greys between the Administratum Grey and the Mechanicus Standard Grey, and I'll use them to start blending these tones together. Just sort of getting that blend going on there. That light to dark, that nice thin strip of light towards the dark of the metal. And I'm just going to replicate that kind of thing across the whole helmet, and it should make it look a lot better. So there's my helmet, looking a bit shinier, looking a bit more metallic-y. Just using those different shades and glazes and stuff and a bit of edge highlighting just to sort of bring out that metallic tone a bit. And then I'm going to replicate it onto the shins as well. So there's our legs, nice and shiny. And I'm going to do that on the little foot strap bits and the wrists, and then we'll check back once we've got that done, and then we'll move on to highlighting and shading the rest of the body. We have the armor shiny, applied all over the other parts. The legs, behind, we've got the little straps sort of lightened up, and the heels of the foot. Obviously we've got the helmet done, and the little wrist parts as well. So with that done, we're getting pretty close to it. What I am going to do is we need another coat of metallic pigment on the chainmail underneath, because it's still extremely light from the primer underneath. And instead of dry brushing, which I did last time, I think I'm just going to really thin it down so it can start seeping into the texture. And then we can apply some black washes and things like that to it. Okay, now that we've got a second layer of lead belcher going across the chainmail, I'm going to add a layer of Nuln Oil over it, just so it can sort of sit and seep into all the tiny little dips and texture of the chainmail, and then it can start bringing down the lightness and sort of upping the contrast a bit. And then once that's dried, we can go over it and add in some black washing and things and some highlights just to sort of bring it out. So that's with our Nuln Oil applied, sort of really darkened it down, and it's seeped into those textures and sort of gave us a bit more contrast to work with, so it's not as bright a model anymore, which is really nice. Ooh, ugh, nearly fell. Let's do the shawl, because that's what's bothering me the most right now. So I have some Caliban Green, which is the darker of the two, and Calibite Green, which is the lighter of the two. Like, the green contrast that I used was a bit of a tester. I don't really like how that test came out, quite honestly. So gonna load up this Caliban Green. I mean, to be fair, the undercoat of the green contrast that we did, the Corandress Green, is actually done all right once I've layered this darker tone on top, because we're getting some brighter tones at the top coming through because we kept this darker green quite thin. And now I'm gonna grab some of the Calibite Green. I'm gonna kind of start working it in, but not going as far in as to take over all of the darker parts of the Calibite Green, but just kind of around this midpoint here, and kind of blend that together a bit. And then I'm going to add some highlights with this Warpstone Glow Green. So if I keep it nice and thin and just target the edges, it should brighten it up a bit. That's a lot better. It's looking a lot better than what we had with just the contrast. We can do the neckerchief thing. So I'm going to do a mid-tone with this sandry dust. Cool. And then for a sort of darker, shady tone underneath the helmet and on the bottom side of the neckerchief, I'm going to use some of this Mournfang Brown. I'm going to kind of target just underneath the helmet here. Then I'll highlight it with some Ushbati bone, which is a nice, light, thin kind of bone layer. And I'm just going to highlight kind of in the center, away from where the Mournfang Brown is. So what I'll do quickly is I'll add a black wash over the chainmail and the shawl, just to sort of bring in some shadows a bit. Right, there we are with our black washed shawl and chainmail, looking a lot better, looking a lot healthier as a model. So next thing to do, I'm gonna do his hands, then we're gonna brighten up the torso, and we should be done. So for the hands, we shall be using Night Quester Flesh, Cadian Flesh Tone, and Kislev Flesh. Shadows, midtones, highlights. So I'll start off by applying the Cadian Flesh Tone midtone. Now I'll add the Night Quester Flesh Shadow Tone. And now I'll just add some Kislev Flesh to areas that I think will be brightest. Do the exact same for the other hand. Hands done. Now, the main part, the white torso. So the way I'm going to approach this is I'm going to map out the highlights with white, and then I'm going to map out the shadows with darker grey, and then I'm just going to start blending between the two. The nice thing about the white contrast underneath is that it's sort of pulled in areas where there will be less light, so you can actually see just enough where you can add the highlights into, and also just using judgment and things like that. So just building up these areas. And the other nice thing about this contrast is that it has brought down the brightness of the primer underneath down a lot, so that you do have space to add brighter highlights to. It would have been pretty tricky to add bright highlights with a very bright primer underneath. There we are. You can see that I've mapped out brighter areas with this Corax white, and it should be a nice sort of easy job to then go back into the gaps that I've left and bring it down with some Mechanicus Standard Grey. Okay, and there we are with our darker shadows in, sort of all over. Now it's going to be a case of just blending them together. I'm going to use a bit of Administratum Grey, which is the nice lighter grey, and I'm going to sort of go between the white and Mechanicus Standard Grey with that. And once that's done, I'll just start blending. Here it is, all blended together. I've got the nice sort of dark shadows around the sun, the sort of like tucked in areas, a bit darker, blended out into the lighter grey, then blended out into the brightest white points, down across to the bottom of the outfit as well, and on the back I did too. And with that, it kind of finishes the model. And I'm pretty happy with how he's turned out. I think he looks pretty cool. Last thing I need to do is do the base. So now that it dried, all the glue dried on, I sprayed it black, and all that's left to do is just paint it a bit. So all I'm gonna do to paint it is grab some Dawnstone, grab some Longbeard Grey, and we're just gonna dry brush on some different tones. Lovely. And I'm also gonna dry brush on a wee layer of brown, add a little bit of color variation to this. All right, and I'm also gonna do some dark green. So I've got this Lauren Forest, and I'm just gonna kind of stipple this on as well. We'll go over it with a black wash, and it should tie these tones together. Cool, yeah, looks all right. A bit more realistic. Black wash really does, really does save a paint job. And I think that about does it. So the last thing to do is get him glued on his base. And there we are. everybody's favorite sunbro. It is Mr. Solaire, the beautiful man of Astora. And I think if we compare him to our first one, I think we can see somewhat of a difference between them. That's the one from a year ago versus about a year and a half's worth of painting experience there. So that about does it. Yeah, only one thing left to do is to thank you so much for joining me today while I was painting one of my favorite NPCs ever created. And yeah, if you liked today's video, leave it a like, drop a comment, hit that subscribe if you haven't already, all that beautiful, lovely, good YouTube stuff that you hear all the time. That about does it. Hit one little praise the sun, and we'll leave it there. And I will see you all next time. Stay grossly incandescent. Praise that sun.